I gave her 3 decades of my life, and she gave it all to another man. What I discovered next shattered everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and myself. I learned the hard way just how quickly an ordinary guy's life can spiral out of control. This all started a few years ago. Back then, my world revolved around my family. Me, Jackson Miller, 42 at the time, my wife Natalie, who was 38, and our 2 kids, Emma, who was 8, and Caleb, 6. We weren't exactly what you'd call the picture of happiness, and life in our Nordic capital city didn't make it any easier. Still, we kept it together. Probably because deep down, we both felt staying as a family was the right thing to do for the kids' sake. Everything began to shift one random Friday evening after work, when I ran into an old classmate, Brian Cooper, at the liquor store. I hadn't seen Brian in a couple of years, and since the place was unusually packed that evening, we had a good chunk of time to catch up while standing in line. To our surprise, we discovered that his wife, Jessica, worked at the same office where Natalie had started working just 6 months earlier. Then Brian asked something that threw me off. "Hey, I didn't see you at the Christmas party. Are you going to the farewell bash for the old company owner?" I told him I hadn't even heard about it, that I wasn't invited. He looked puzzled and said, "Wait, seriously? All the spouses are invited. Why wouldn't you be? Let me double check, but I'm sure you're welcome. I'll see you there, buddy." The party he was talking about was planned because the longtime company owners had just sold their business to a large national investment firm. They were stepping aside officially on March 1st and wanted to host a farewell event to show appreciation to the team before the transition. Of course, I remembered the Christmas party all too well. It had been Natalie's first company holiday event at her new job. She told me rather apologetically that it was employees only and that spouses weren't invited. I didn't question her at the time. She'd even gone out and bought this new, stunning dress, something a little more daring than she usually wore. I remember how beautiful she looked that night, and how late she came home. It was nearly 4 in the morning when she walked through the door, noticeably tipsy and looking a bit disheveled. We ended up arguing, naturally. But eventually, I gave in and accepted her explanation, that the party had gone long and she'd ended the night with a small group at one of her co-workers' places for a few drinks. She cried and swore up and down that nothing inappropriate had happened, that she hadn't been with any other man. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something in me didn't sit right. I had my doubts. Still, without any solid proof, what could I really do? That night, I returned home from the store with more questions in my mind than I'd had when I left. As soon as I got home that evening, I told Natalie that I'd bumped into an old friend, Brian Cooper, at the liquor store. I casually mentioned that his wife, Jessica, apparently worked at the same company she did. Right away, I could see something shift in her expression. I must have looked worried because she tried to brush it off. "What's her name again?" she asked. "Jessica Cooper. Does that ring a bell?" I replied. She paused. "No, I don't know her." "Did he say she knows me?" I shook my head. "Not really. But he mentioned something else. Said all the spouses were invited to the company's Christmas party. So now I'm wondering, who exactly pretended to be your husband that night? And where did you actually spend it?" She froze for a moment, then gave me this tired sigh, like we were dragging up something she'd hoped was buried. "Jackson, I've already explained. I thought the invite was for employees only. I was new. I didn't fully understand how things worked yet." I stared at her. "So let me get this straight. Out of everyone in your office, you were the only one who didn't know their spouse could come? That doesn't make any sense." Trying to redirect things, she added, "After the party, I promised I'd figure out who played games with you, made you feel excluded. And if anyone crossed the line that night, believe me, I'd make sure they regretted it." Then out of nowhere she broke down crying. Through her sobs she said, "I've told you before, we were just hanging out. There were around 12, maybe 15 of us. We had a few drinks, did some dancing. That's all. There's no reason for you to be upset or jealous." But the holes in her story kept getting bigger. Her tears didn't fill them. And as much as I wanted to just let it go, I couldn't. Not this time. So I asked, "Am I invited to the next company party? Have you signed us up?" The moment I said it, her face shifted, just slightly, but I caught it. A flicker of hesitation. She hadn't told me a single thing about that party before now. But she realized I already knew that spouses were expected to come, thanks to Brian. "Of course," she said after a pause. "I registered both of us. I just forgot to mention it, that's all." But her voice didn't sound convincing. And deep down I didn't buy it. I could feel it, something wasn't right. By then, our marriage had already started to feel like two strangers sharing a house. Any warmth between us was fading fast. Physical intimacy? practically non-existent. Trying to pretend everything was fine started to feel like a performance I didn't want to keep up anymore. And then things took another turn. The next Friday, right after lunch, I left work early. Took a few hours off to run some errands around town. Natalie usually wrapped up her week by 1 p.m. on Fridays, so we both ended up home that afternoon. That's when the phone rang. I answered the phone, and right away I could tell the call was coming from someone driving. The background buzzed with dance music playing low from the car radio. But no one spoke. Just silence. Then the call abruptly ended. Natalie looked at me and asked, "Who was that?" Without thinking much, I smirked and said, "Your boyfriend." But he hung up when he realized I picked up. It was meant as a light-hearted joke. A bit of dry humor to ease the tension that had been building between us. But the moment the words left my mouth, I saw her face freeze, just for a split second, before she erupted. "What's wrong with you?" she snapped. "Are you out of your mind? What are you even accusing me of?" I raised my hands slightly. "It was just a joke. That's all. But honestly, the way you're reacting now? You're making me question if I hit closer to the truth than I meant to." She looked away for a second, then softened her voice. "No, Jackson, you're wrong. That's not what this is. That was just more of your jealousy talking. You've been humiliating me with these suspicions, and it's unfair." Later that week, we attended the farewell party for the company's old owners. During a brief trip to the restroom, I found myself chatting with another spouse, a guy who'd been seated at the same table with us earlier in the evening. As we talked, something came up that caught me off guard. He said, "My wife mentioned your wife, Natalie Miller, right? She said the name sounded noble, like something out of a history book." Then he added, almost casually, "I remember hearing about her from the Christmas party. My wife said she spent most of that night glued to one of her male co-workers. Real close, the two of them." That hit me like a punch in the gut. I never thought I'd hear something like that about my wife. But I guess every guy who's been blindsided says the same thing. Never thought it would happen to them. Still, there I was, living out a story I never signed up for. That night, even though we ended things in the bedroom with a kind of intensity that felt almost desperate, I couldn't fall asleep. My mind was racing. I lay there wondering, did she see me as some insecure caveman now? Was I just becoming a jealous fool in her eyes, or had I always been the nice guy she quietly outgrew? The next 8 days were strangely quiet. Nothing dramatic happened. There was this faint sense that maybe, just maybe, things were smoothing over. That maybe the worst was behind us and we were trying, however awkwardly, to mend things. But then, out of nowhere, everything came crashing down. One morning, I noticed she was dressed up a little more than usual, nothing outrageous, just polished. Her hair done nicely, subtle makeup, a spritz of perfume. Enough to catch my attention. Over breakfast, she casually mentioned, "Oh, I forgot to tell you. I might be home a little late tonight. I have some stuff to wrap up." That's all she said. But after everything, those small things felt enormous. Like warning signs I couldn't ignore anymore. Looking back, I realize now that I should have handled things differently. Instead of confronting Natalie over and over, I should have started gathering facts, real proof, before letting my suspicions show. But I didn't. I led with emotion, not logic. A few minutes after that odd breakfast exchange, I walked back into the kitchen. She was there, dressed like she normally would be on any average day. The polished look from earlier was gone. She didn't say a word to me. And truthfully, I had no idea what to say to her either. It was in that quiet moment I started to accept something I hadn't wanted to believe. If our marriage had any hope left, it would take a miracle. If she was truly innocent, then the way I'd been treating her, full of suspicion and tension, must have been unbearable for her. And if she wasn't innocent, well, then maybe it was already over and I was the last one to realize it. Desperate for some clarity, I started digging. I checked her computer. Nothing invasive, just trying to understand what was going on. That's when I stumbled upon a new email account she'd set up, something I hadn't seen before. Most of the inbox was filled with the usual junk, ads, newsletters, nothing important. But a few emails caught my eye. In the first week of using that account, she'd only sent out a handful of messages. They were all brief, all polite. One of them was to someone named Happy Conrad, letting him know she had a new email and was back online. His reply, which she had deleted but not permanently erased, simply read, "Great to have my darling online again." That line stuck with me. Maybe it was just a weird nickname, or maybe it was something more. I didn't know yet. But what I did know was that she was in touch with someone she hadn't told me about. That, by itself, meant something wasn't right. From that moment, I knew I had to be smart. If I wanted the truth, I'd have to be quiet and patient. I hoped I'd be able to gather something useful. I also realized they might be using their phones instead of email, which would explain why there wasn't much to find online. One day I left town unexpectedly. I booked a flight to London and flew back the next day. Not because I needed to be there, but because I needed to test something. During the entire trip, I used my personal MasterCard for every single expense, thinking that if this ever went further, into lawyers maybe, I'd want a clear record of where I was and what I did. When I got back, I went straight to her computer again. There wasn't much. Just one lonely email from Happy Lad, telling her he was sitting alone in a hotel room, wishing she were there with him to keep him company. She never replied, at least not through email. I began trying to figure out who this guy was. I found a name, Frederick. He lived in our town. He was a salesman. But it wasn't much to go on. Frederick was a common name and sales was a broad job. Still, something in my gut told me he worked at the same company as Natalie. Problem was, I didn't have anything solid, just a few whispers in the dark. I knew I had a slim window, just a small chance, to follow Natalie and maybe catch a glimpse of the truth for myself. These days, most people rely on their cell phones for nearly all their communication. And it seemed that Natalie and this man Frederick were no exception. Since I couldn't dig up anything else on her computer, I decided it was time to act. So I made a plan. That morning, Natalie left for work like usual, dropping off our son Caleb at preschool on the way. Emma headed off to school. I stayed back, having taken another day off from work. I told myself it was just to clear my head, but I knew I had something else in mind. By 10:30 a.m., I had parked my van in a spot where I could see both the staff entrance of her office and her car in the lot. The dark-tinted windows made it easy for me to watch without being seen. I sat behind the driver's seat, heart pounding, waiting. Just after 11 o'clock I saw her. She came out, walked straight to her car and drove off. I followed from a distance. She headed to a residential area, pulled into a small complex and parked. That's when it became real. This wasn't just in my head anymore. Fueled by months of anxiety, betrayal, and sleepless nights, something inside me snapped. I saw red. Inside that apartment, Frederick wasn't expecting me. He barely had time to register what was happening before my anger took control. He was younger, in better shape maybe, but the shock on his face, and the fury in my chest, tipped the scale. I confronted him, and before I knew it, the moment exploded into violence. I don't take pride in what I did, but I won't pretend it didn't happen. The pain of seeing my marriage crumble pushed me past a limit I didn't know I had. When it was over, he lay still on the floor, groaning. I looked around the tiny, simply furnished one-room apartment. It was clear this wasn't his real home. Maybe it was a place they used for their meetings, but it wasn't permanent. I grabbed his phone and a few papers from his briefcase, documents that included his home address and other personal details. The rest of the day I was numb. I went back to what used to be our home, gathered my clothes and whatever personal items I could carry, and moved into a small apartment I'd already lined up in case things went south. I left a copy of the divorce papers on the kitchen table. No note, no goodbye, just the papers. That said everything I needed to say. By then, I was sure the affair hadn't been some drunken one-night mistake at the Christmas party. It had been going on for months at least. If it had been just a single moment of weakness, maybe there could have been some kind of forgiveness, something to rebuild. Or if she'd canceled that meeting with him after our last breakfast together, if she'd taken a step back, then maybe Frederick wouldn't have ended up hurt, and maybe things wouldn't have escalated the way they did. But none of that happened. Later, I learned that Frederick could have taken me to court. Tried to sue me maybe. But unless I had assets or money to go after, it wouldn't get him very far. The legal system doesn't spend too much time chasing ghosts of financial revenge when there's nothing to collect. Then something unexpected happened. Natalie reached out. She contacted me and asked if we could meet, to talk about the kids. She suggested we meet at a local restaurant. After everything, I wasn't sure what to expect. But I knew I had to go, for Emma and Caleb's sake if nothing else. I went to meet Natalie at the restaurant, unsure of how things would go, but surprisingly we managed to keep the conversation civil. She started by admitting what I already suspected. Yes, she'd been having an affair with Frederick. And not just recently. She confessed that it had started just a few weeks after she joined the company, during a restructuring in the sales department. She told me she had made a terrible mistake. That losing our family would be far more painful than any short-term guilt or money lost. She apologized sincerely, or at least it seemed that way, and said she wanted us to try again. She hoped we could rebuild, start fresh, maybe even reunite for the sake of Emma and Caleb. But I didn't give her the answer she wanted. I told her, calmly but clearly, that I'd rather have a cheating wife as an ex-wife than take her back and pretend like nothing happened. She didn't take it well. Her expression sank into something between disbelief and sadness. But the truth had to be spoken. Before we parted ways that evening, I gave her one last warning. If you're thinking about hiring a lawyer to chase down whatever money you think I might have spent or hidden, don't. It'll cost you more than it's worth. You'll spend a fortune and come back empty-handed. The following Monday at work, I got another shock, one I didn't see coming at all. My secretary Sarah walked into my office and right away I sensed something was off. She looked uncomfortable, like she had something weighing on her. She finally said, "Frederick, he told people we were having an affair. That's why he did it, to get back at you." I blinked in disbelief. "Wait, what? You and I? An affair?" I couldn't hide the shock in my voice. "Sarah, why didn't you tell me this earlier? When did this supposed affair even happen? How can I be part of something I didn't even know about?" Sarah shook her head and gave a tired smile. "You're not the only one who didn't know. Turns out neither of us were informed that we were having an affair. I guess we should have been the first to know." It was absurd, surreal even. I could barely wrap my head around the fact that someone like Frederick, someone I barely knew, had used a fake story about me and Sarah just to cover his own betrayal. It was a gut punch, but I also couldn't help but feel sorry that Sarah had been dragged into it too. Later that day she took the afternoon off. Said she needed some time after speaking with her lawyer. I stayed behind, caught up on a few things at work, then stopped to grab some groceries before heading back to my apartment. I didn't expect anything unusual that evening. But around 6 p.m. my doorbell rang. It was Sarah, standing there with a small overnight bag slung over her shoulder. She smiled softly and said, "Just in case you were serious about that date?" "I am." She'd had a rough day, emotionally draining meetings, legal talk, reminders of what she'd lost. I told her to relax while I cooked us dinner. Later we sat on the couch, side by side, talking into the night. We talked about everything, our marriages, the betrayal, how we'd both been blindsided. There wasn't any pretense. Just two people with broken hearts, trying to find warmth in each other's presence. Somewhere in that quiet evening, she asked me something soft, hesitant. Something about what might come next. I didn't have all the answers. But in that moment, all I knew was that the worst part of my story might be over, and the next chapter hadn't been written yet. As for Natalie, her divorce wrapped up like expected. She walked away with half of everything, and a mountain of debt owed to her lawyer. In the end, she got her freedom, but it cost her far more than she imagined. The only thing we still shared was our children. And when we met again to talk about them, it was no longer as husband and wife, but as two people trying to raise kids from separate lives. When Natalie and I met again, this time to talk through some final legal matters, I reminded her of something I'd told her earlier in this whole ordeal. "You should have listened," I said. "I warned you about chasing after money like a shark circling a sinking ship." Tears welled up in her eyes. "How could you take all our money, Jackson?" she asked. "How could you do that to me?" I didn't flinch. "How could you betray me like that?" I said quietly. "How could you go behind my back and cheat on me?" Her next words caught me off guard. "Because I was a fool," she admitted, barely above a whisper. "It was the worst mistake I've ever made in my entire life." I looked at her for a long moment, then asked, "Does Frederick know that? That you regret it?" She didn't answer. Eventually the law caught up with me. I was sentenced to 2 months in a minimum security facility for what they called a white-collar offense, and the court ordered me to pay Frederick compensation for the beating and the damage I caused in that little apartment. But I never paid him. Not a cent. I had no intention of doing so. I told the court I'd pay him as soon as I had any money, which of course I didn't. And as long as I remained broke, there wasn't much anyone could legally do to force me. Life moved on. Sarah and I both left our old jobs behind. They had become too intertwined with all the chaos, the past. We started fresh, and Sarah launched her own small consulting company. I came on board with her. It felt right, clean. Like we were finally writing a story of our own, not just reacting to the damage others had caused. One day Sarah came to me with a dilemma. "I wanted to ask you something," she said. "David's sister is getting married soon. His parents, well, I know they're going to use the wedding as a chance to push me back toward him. To try and convince me that we should reunite." She hesitated, then added, "So I was thinking maybe I shouldn't go. But the truth is I'm really close with his sister and I'd love to be there on her big day. That is, if it's okay with you." I smiled gently and told her the truth. "You're a grown woman, Sarah. If you want to go, then go. It might actually be nice to see her happy. Just know what you're walking into." She smiled back, but there was a quiet intensity behind her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "for trusting me." That night when she came over, it was like all the walls we'd built just disappeared. She came into my bedroom holding a small overnight bag and a tired but warm smile. Without much of a word, she let her clothes fall away and laid back on the bed, reaching for me. "Just in case you were serious about us," she whispered. "I am?" She pulled me toward her, her voice hushed in my ear. "I love you so much, make love to me." I followed her lead, both of us moving together with the kind of closeness that only comes when two people have survived heartbreak and found something real on the other side. Afterwards, we lay in bed, the silence filled only by the rhythm of our breathing. Then she looked at me and teased, "Did I shock you by coming home feeling this, let's say, affectionate?" I chuckled. "You didn't shock me," I replied. "You gave me the kind of surprise I've been waiting years for." She kissed my shoulder and said, "I love you for trusting me enough to let me go to that wedding. But just so you know, they're going to try. They're going to pull out every trick they can to get me back with David." I met her eyes, calm and certain. "Let them try," I said. "I trust you. That's the difference. My name is Troy Evans. Until not too long ago, my life looked pretty average, at least from the outside. My wife, Sarah, and I had been together for over 3 decades. That's a long time to share a life. Through all those years, we worked hard to take the best from what life had to offer and raise our kids with honesty, resilience, and purpose. We had 3 children, Greg, our oldest, then our daughter Christine, and finally Amanda, the youngest, who's now 24. We poured our hearts into raising them, doing everything we could to give them a solid start in life. Our house was built on love, discipline, and that quiet sense of duty that comes from knowing your family depends on you. But life, as it always does, took some turns we never saw coming. It started when I had an accident, one that left me broken in ways I hadn't imagined. My body stopped cooperating. I was told I might never walk again. The doctor gave me the kind of prognosis that strips the color out of your future. I tried to be strong, but inside I felt defeated. At first, Sarah kept her emotions bottled up. But one day she broke down. I could see it in her eyes. It hurt her deeply to see me like that. She held my hand and told me everything was going to be okay, that I'd recover, that I'd run again like I used to. But I didn't believe her. I didn't believe in much of anything at that point, not doctors, not miracles, not even myself. And I'd never been a religious man, but one night I found myself praying. I don't know why. Maybe it was desperation. Or maybe I just needed someone, to hear me. A few days later, something strange happened. I woke up one morning staring blankly at the ceiling when I felt something, just a slight tickle, on my big toe. I raised my head, slowly, almost not believing what I was feeling. I wiggled it. Then another toe moved. It was faint, but it was real. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. But deep down, I knew something had changed. Still, while my body began the slow process of healing, I couldn't shake this odd feeling that something was different about the house. Not just the physical space, but the air, the energy. Like while I was down and out, something else had moved in. A tension. A shift. I brushed it off as side effects from the medication or leftover trauma from everything I'd been through. But it lingered. Not wanting to sink into the background of my own life like an old coat draped over the back of the couch, I decided to get up and do something. I turned to cooking, a skill I hadn't practiced in years. I found an online course, enrolled, and started experimenting in the kitchen. At first I kept things simple. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep myself engaged and feeling human again. One afternoon, while I was preparing a light meal, I shared the update with Sarah. "Amanda called today," I said. She perked up. "Really? I just talked to her a few days ago." "What did she say?" "She said they're finally coming back," I told her. Her face lit up. "That's wonderful news. We should do something special, have a little welcome home dinner or something." But when I mentioned the specific day Amanda planned to return, Sarah paused. Something shifted in her face. I asked, "Is something wrong?" She hesitated. No, it's nothing. It's just that, well, the organization I work with is celebrating its 20th anniversary on that same day. There's a big event planned." I nodded, trying not to let my disappointment show. "We'll figure something out," I said quietly. That evening, the house felt heavy again. I sat in the living room, flipping through old magazines, letting the TV run quietly in the background. I glanced at the clock. Time was moving, but something inside me felt stuck. By the time I glanced at the clock, it was well past 10 p.m., and Sarah still hadn't come home. I tried to be reasonable. Maybe the celebration had run a little longer than planned. Maybe she was just catching up with old colleagues or stuck in traffic. But 11 p.m. came and went. Then midnight. Still no word. No message. No call. I picked up my phone and dialed her number, hoping for some explanation. It rang, then went to voicemail. I tried again. And again. For another half hour I kept trying. No answer. Just silence. Something didn't feel right. I'd spent years as a police officer. Even in retirement, that instinct never left me. I wasn't jumping to conclusions, but I wasn't about to ignore the weight in my gut either. So I got in the car and drove. I had no idea where I was going, just a vague feeling that something was off. Eventually, I pulled into a quiet neighborhood I recognized, a place I knew Sarah had occasionally mentioned in passing. I got out of the car and walked slowly down the street, using my cane to steady my steps. Then I heard it, laughter, voices, then silence. Something drew me toward a modest house at the end of the block. The door was slightly ajar. I stepped in. That's when I saw it. A small couch in the corner of the room. A man and a woman tangled under a thin blanket, their clothes strewn carelessly on the floor. Both were clearly passed out, probably drunk beyond reason. The woman, my wife, lay there oblivious. The truth hit me like a brick to the chest. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I just gripped my cane tightly and slammed it against the floor. The sharp crack echoed through the room like a gunshot. The man stirred first, blinking groggily at me before shaking Sarah awake. She opened her eyes, confused at first. Then she saw me, and everything in her expression changed. I stood frozen. My body ached, but not as much as my heart. I wanted to lash out, but I didn't. I was too old to end up in a prison cell, especially over something like this. But I also knew my temper. In that moment, I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust what I might do, not to him but to her. So I turned to leave. I couldn't bear to see her like that. Not Sarah. Not the woman I'd built a life with. But just as I turned my back, the man lunged. With surprising strength, especially for someone half awake and half dressed, he shoved me from behind. I stumbled forward, crashing down onto a small table which gave way beneath my weight. Everything on it spilled over me, dust, crumbs, glass. I could barely register what had happened before the man grabbed his coat and bolted out the door, leaving nothing but chaos behind. Sarah stood there, wide-eyed and trembling. I didn't know if you'd survive, she whispered. You were in pain, distant, and I was lonely. So what are you saying? I asked, my voice quiet but sharp. That you've been involved with him for 2 years? She nodded, silent. I couldn't believe it. 2 years, Sarah. 2 years. I felt something twist inside me. I raised my cane in anger, not to strike, but out of helplessness. She flinched, then moved away. I'm sorry, Troy, she said. We had a good life. But now I love him. And just like that, she walked out the door. I spent the next 2 days in the hospital. The fall had bruised me up pretty bad. The doctors ran some scans, gave me fluids, and kept me under observation just to be safe. Only when they were sure I was stable did they let me go. When I returned to my empty apartment, it felt colder than ever. I sat there looking around, the silence pressing in from every direction. Then I heard soft footsteps. Sarah. She walked through the doorway, paused for a moment, then glanced at me before heading toward the kitchen. I actually felt calm. Tired but calm. I had survived the worst of it. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to live again. There were some truths I just couldn't bring myself to say out loud. Not to Amanda. Not yet. When she walked into the kitchen that day and asked her mother a question, one that echoed the same thoughts circling in my head, I stayed silent from the couch, pretending not to hear. From where I sat, I watched Sarah rise, walk to the kitchen door and close it behind her. The two of them talked in hushed voices behind that door for a while. I couldn't make out much. Now and then Amanda's voice would rise, sharp, emotional. I could tell she was demanding answers. Eventually the door creaked open again. Amanda came out, her face tense, while Sarah lingered in the kitchen, staring down at the counter like she had nowhere else to go. Outside of that heavy atmosphere at home, my new apartment slowly started feeling like mine. The neighbors turned out to be warm, decent folks. I'd often sit on the bench outside the building to get some air, and that's where I met them. Regular people going about their lives, kind enough to nod and say hello. Across the street lived a woman named Linda. She was a nurse, divorced for quite a few years, and from our early chats, it was clear she lived mostly alone. We'd started talking more regularly. Nothing romantic, just two people who'd been through things finding comfort in conversation. She offered to stop by occasionally, especially after she found out about my injury. Even offered to check my blood pressure from time to time, which was sweet of her. To be honest, I didn't mind her visits. We discovered we shared some similar interests: gardening, crime novels, old jazz records. Our conversations were easy and there was always something to talk about. One evening, Linda came over looking shaken. "I can't believe how stupid I was," she muttered, dropping her bag by the door. "What happened?" I asked. "I trusted him," she said bitterly. "He seemed so nice, ran a quiet little store, always polite. I thought, maybe he was someone I could build something with. Then today, it all fell apart." She paused, looked down, then continued, "I walked in on him in the bedroom. He was packing up my jewelry, stuffing cash into a bag like it was his. When I confronted him, he snapped, actually hit me. I didn't even recognize him in that moment. I didn't know what to say at first. Part of me wanted to laugh, not out of cruelty but because of the twisted irony. After everything Sarah had done, to see this woman who had only shown me kindness face betrayal too, it almost felt like the universe had a grim sense of humor. But I didn't say what I was thinking. I didn't tell her she should have seen it coming, or that she deserved it. She didn't. No one does. Instead, I just listened. That's what she needed. Later that week, I caught up with my old friend Matt. He's the one who told me more details. Apparently, the guy Linda had trusted had been running scams quietly for a while. No one had suspected him until that morning, when things escalated and someone finally called the police. Matt had heard all about it through work. I tried not to think about Sarah. I didn't want to hear anything about her new life, or who she was with. That chapter was closed. And whatever pain she might have felt from Frederick turning on her, I let karma handle that. I turned my focus inward. Cooking, oddly enough, became something of a lifeline for me. I stuck with it, refining techniques, trying out new recipes. I had time on my hands and it helped fill the silence. It also gave me small goals, something to improve upon day by day. Each dish I made was a reminder that I was still moving forward. One afternoon, I stopped by a quiet little cafe near the park. I wasn't looking for anything special, just a place to sit down and enjoy a glass of juice while watching the world go by. I picked a table outside under the shade of a big oak, and had just placed my order when I heard a voice behind me. Familiar. Unmistakable. I turned around and saw an old acquaintance, Randy. Years ago, he'd taken a swing at the restaurant business. It hadn't worked out exactly how he planned, but he'd found his footing as a chef instead, and by the look on his face he was doing okay. We were both surprised to run into each other but glad all the same. We sat and talked, catching up like people do after a long time apart. And then, as conversations often do, we found ourselves circling back to familiar wounds, old stories, broken trust, and the fallout from choices made. Randy had heard about Sarah. He told me what I hadn't known before. Apparently, Frederick, Sarah's so-called second chance, had a pattern. This wasn't the first time he'd pulled something like that. He'd get involved in romantic flings, gain trust, and then quietly steal from the very people who opened their hearts to him. This time, Randy said, shaking his head, Sarah woke up earlier than expected. Caught him red-handed before he could vanish with the jewelry and cash. That's how he got nailed. I let that sink in. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part just felt tired. I admitted to Randy that if I'd had the chance back then, I probably would have laid into the guy again. But I knew better now. Even if I did throw a couple of punches, I was pretty sure anyone who saw it would claim he tripped over his own lies. He had it coming. Later, I was brought in for questioning, just formalities from the earlier incident, long after the dust had settled. Joe, the officer on duty, leaned in as he led me into the room and whispered, "Don't worry. No one's behind the mirror right now. You can speak freely." And I did. In time, the sharp sting of betrayal faded. I had the kids to thank for that. Their love helped ground me. We eventually reached a place where we could talk about their mother without anger or bitterness. They told me how she regretted everything, how sorry she had been. At one point, I even felt a flicker of pity for her. But that door had closed a long time ago. There was no going back. Years passed. Life didn't return to what it once was, but it found a different kind of peace. Linda, my neighbor, the nurse, remained a quiet, steady presence in my life. She never pushed. Never made promises she couldn't keep. And though I had doubts early on, wondering if betrayal might strike twice, she gave me no reason to fear. She wasn't trying to replace anyone or rewrite my past. She just stayed. She was a few years older than me, just 2, but age didn't matter much when someone treated you with simple, steady kindness. And that, in the end, was enough.